So Like a Dragon Ishin finally got a Western release, and not just a Western release, it got a remake. And to be clear, I didn't play the original game, so I can't draw any comparisons to tell you what stays true to the original, what's better or what's worse. Although I do have experience with previous RGG titles, so I can draw comparison to those to tell you whether this is good or not. And I'll say that Like a Dragon Ishin shares a lot of positive aspects with its RGG brethren, but I don't think it was my favorite to play. So without further ado, let's just get into the review. So Like a Dragon Ishin takes place in 1860s Japan during the Bakumatsu era nearing the end of the Edo period. And it was a time of deep political turmoil between the shogunate, which this game tends to refer to as the Bakufu, and the Ishin Shishi, which this game normally refers to as loyalists. It's a time of very rigid class systems, a wariness of foreign powers, and the constant danger of bloodshed. What sets this game apart from other Yakuza titles is that it actually is based on historical events, although it is still very fictional. For example, you play as Sakamoto Ryoma, which was an actual figure in Japanese history, and you join the Shinsengumi, which was an actual special police force during this time. But the story itself is very fictional, so don't expect any historical accuracy here. And just like most RGG games, the story is laced in conspiracy, twists, turns, betrayals, character developments, and so on. If you enjoyed the Yakuza games stories, you'll most likely enjoy this one. Although I will say, it doesn't get as wild as those games, because let's be honest, some of the Yakuza game stories and their twists could be pretty fucking ridiculous. But I'd say this game is a bit more tame, but don't get me wrong, it can still get rather intense and crazy. It's a soap opera set in feudal Japan. But I'd say my favorite part about Ishin is the parallels I can draw between it and its characters from Yakuza because they share the same likeness. But the thing is that they share actually a bit more, but have enough differences to set themselves apart. Now, to be fair, a character like Soji is pretty much just Majima, but some characters had me sitting there thinking to myself like, interesting, this was sort of talked about in previous Yakuza games. For example, imagine if Kiryu and Goda met at a different time or in a different life. You get to sort of see that here, and it's actually really cool. Now, were there any issues with the story? Yes, but they're kind of the ones that you come to expect from RGG titles. I mean, some scenes can just be drawn out, pretty exposition heavy, or just be overly dramatic, but honestly, these are things you come to accept. And it didn't bother me overall, but I will say that there was times where I did get confused during the story because of all the names they use and like double lives and so on, but overall I enjoyed seeing the story come together and found it very gripping. Now, I'm gonna be blunt, I wasn't really a fan of the combat in this game. And to be fair, I'm not somebody that would put much importance in this when it comes to RGG titles, because I felt it was always there to service things like the main story, the open world, the sub-stories, and so forth, so it was never really a main selling point for me. But I gotta say, it affected my overall enjoyment of this game. And I think that's because after coming from Lost Judgment's combat, this just feels a little weak in comparison. I believe Lost Judgment has the best combat that RGG has made, and I think there's people out there that would agree with me, and some people like SkillUp, for example, that may not agree and thought that that game's combat was nothing to really write home about. But I don't think he or other people may have grasped just how well that game's combat flows together. Its styles and its abilities actually synergize, and that's the thing, I felt like that didn't happen here with Like a Dragon Ishin. So you have four main styles to choose from. You have the Swordsman, which is slow and deliberate but has good defense and offense and is mainly used for one-on-one duels such as boss fights. Then you have the Wild Dancer, which is probably the coolest style of the bunch, where you wield a sword and a pistol, and you'll be spinning around while slicing and dicing, shooting, and doing very clean evasion. You're gonna most likely use this style a whole lot because it's useful for groups, and that's what you're fighting most of the time. Then you have the Gunman, which is pretty cool and has its specific uses here and there. And then you have the Brawler, which is a hand-to-hand combat system, which is pretty fun to use as well. And that's the thing, the fighting styles themselves are pretty fun and cool to use and can be rather cathartic, as some people would put it, but I find it kind of loses that effect over time. After a while, the game just became very mind-numbing to me. And that's because the styles don't really flow together that well. There's nothing stopping you from switching between the styles in combat situations, but they just don't really synergize that much. For example, in Lost Judgment, you can be in the crane style, do a perfect dodge which will give you an attack speed buff, knock an enemy up, switch to the tiger style which will give you high single target damage, do a charge attack which will give you an attack buff, and then switch to snake style while having both of these buffs active to do a really strong grappling maneuver. Then from here you can go into an extreme heat mode and then just fuck everything up. This is an example of me switching between 3 different styles in a single combat situation and their abilities synergizing, along with it just flowing really nicely. I don't know if I'm missing something, but I didn't really get anything like that in Like a Dragon Ishin. The styles and the skill trees are very segmented and don't really complement each other, and it doesn't help that switching between the styles feels a little clunky. I find this game would have really benefited from the instant style switching from games like Yakuza Kiwami. Maybe I'm blind, but I didn't find an ability like that. And I wouldn't really mind that if the game's mechanics didn't feel messy. And that's the thing, there's just something about the movement and the dodging and attacking that feels a little sticky. The hitboxes can be a little wonky at times, and then there's enemies and bosses getting random hyper armor. It just adds up and becomes really annoying, especially on the hard difficulty where mistakes matter more. And don't get me wrong, I'm aware that other RGG titles have their messy aspects when it comes to combat, but there was something about it that just felt more noticeable here in Ishin, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just because Lost Judgment felt that much more seamless to me, then now it just feels like a disappointment. Something I forgot to mention was the Trooper system, which are these cards that you can use, and some people were wary about this, but I assure you, you don't actually have to use these in your playthrough if you don't want to. Although they can be rather useful. Some of them are crazy, like spawning a bear out of fucking nowhere and just slashing someone, but some of them are actually more easygoing and just do things like giving you attack power or healing you up. So it's only really as crazy as you make it. But yeah, overall, I guess the combat just left me kind of wishing for more. It's pretty fun at first and can still be enjoyable. It's just, I think it could have been better. But who knows, maybe I'm missing something. Maybe there's this key ingredient or ability that just makes everything come together and I'm just not seeing it. So for those of you that have played the game and you're in the comments, let me know. Now, I don't have a lot to say about the side content other than it's a really nice change of pace from the rest of the game. Things like the side stories may not be as wild as they would be in games like Yakuza 0, but they're still pretty interesting and fun to go through. Of course, you also have mini games, and the dance class in this game is actually pretty fun and engaging, although pretty challenging. Trying to do the song Heartbeat made me go fucking cross-eyed, but the really big form of secondary content in this game is called Another Life, where you'll be managing a home with this game's version of Haruka. You can change up the house, do some farming, make some deliveries, do some cooking. It's just a really nice contrast from the rest of this game that's so soaked in blood and political turmoil. It's just nice to sit back and fucking relax. And the rest of the game's side content and minigames actually feed into the secondary plot rather well. Now, it may not be as unique as doing something like managing a cabaret club, but it's just so fitting in this game and is such a welcome addition. You have other side content though, like working with the Shinsengumi to take down bandit caves and mines, but this wasn't really my favorite because it's pretty much just combat, and like I said, I'm not really a fan of the combat in this game. But overall, I really enjoyed the rest of the side content. So overall, I think Like a Dragon Ishin is still a nice entry in RGG's library. It's just things like the combat simply didn't click for me, but I still really enjoyed the main story as well as the side content that it had to offer. So I think it's a good entry, just not one of my favorites, but I'd still definitely recommend giving it a shot. Anyhow, thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and let me know what you think in the comments down below. Whether you played the game or you didn't, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Peace.